What if I told you that the most eaten cuisine on the planet is also one of the most misunderstood, misrepresented, and outright rejected foods in the world? That the dishes billions of people call Chinese food have almost nothing to do with what people actually eat in China? That a nation with thousands of years of culinary history watched the rest of the world butcher its food so completely that an entirely fake version of Chinese cuisine now exists, and that fake version is more popular than the real thing? And that in some countries, Chinese food isn't just disliked, it's feared, banned, and wrapped in decades of political tension? Behind every fortune cookie, every sweet and sour chicken, and every noodle box sits a story of culture, identity, and global misunderstanding so deep it will genuinely change how you think about the food on your plate. Stick around because this one goes far deeper than you ever imagined. Chinese cuisine is the oldest continuously practiced culinary tradition on Earth, stretching back over 5,000 years. It is not one cuisine. It is 8 major regional cuisines: Cantonese, Sichuan, Hunan, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Fujian, Anhui, and Shandong, each as different from each other as Italian food is from Japanese food. China is a continent disguised as a country, and its food reflects every climate, geography, and cultural tradition within it. Today, there are over 500,000 Chinese restaurants outside of China, more than any other cuisine on Earth. Chinese food feeds more people globally every single day than any other culinary tradition in history. But here is the uncomfortable truth hiding beneath those numbers. The Chinese food most of the world eats is not Chinese food. It is a westernized, localized, heavily modified imitation, created not by Chinese chefs preserving tradition, but by Chinese immigrants adapting desperately to survive in foreign countries that didn't understand or accept their culture. The real Chinese food, the food of Sichuan grandmothers, Cantonese morning dim sum, Shanghainese soup dumplings, remains almost completely unknown to the majority of the world. And that gap between the real and the fake has created one of the most fascinating and complicated food stories on the planet. To understand why some countries love Chinese food and others reject it entirely, you first have to understand how Chinese food spread across the globe in the first place. It didn't spread through cultural celebration. It spread through desperation. In the 1800s, waves of Chinese immigrants arrived in the United States, Australia, and Southeast Asia, fleeing poverty, famine, and political instability. They brought their food with them. But the local populations weren't ready for the bold flavors of Sichuan peppercorns, the fermented intensity of black bean paste, or the unfamiliar textures of century eggs and pig trotters. So Chinese immigrants did what survivors do. They adapted, they softened the flavors, they sweetened the sauces, they replaced unfamiliar ingredients with local ones. They invented dishes that had never existed in China, dishes designed specifically to appeal to Western palates: chop suey, chow mein, sweet and sour pork, General Tso's chicken. None of these dishes exist in China. Every single one was invented outside of it, and the world fell in love, not with Chinese food, but with this new hybrid creation. A cuisine born not from tradition, but from the necessity of survival in a foreign land. The stage was set for a global story of love, rejection, and everything in between. America has over 45,000 Chinese restaurants, more than the number of McDonald's locations in the entire country. Chinese food is the most ordered takeout cuisine in America by a significant margin. But here's the twist. Almost none of it resembles actual Chinese food. General Tso's chicken, crab rangoon, fortune cookies, all American inventions. Real Chinese food has been making slow inroads in major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, where authentic Sichuan, Cantonese, and Shanghainese restaurants have built passionate followings. But mainstream America remains deeply attached to its Americanized version. Chinese chefs trying to introduce authentic dishes often face a brutal reality. Customers send them back and ask for the familiar sweet orange sauce instead. Britain's relationship with Chinese food is one of the most unique in the world. Chinese food arrived in Britain in the early 1900s and went through an even more dramatic transformation than in America. British Chinese food developed its own entirely separate identity. Dishes like crispy, aromatic duck, salt and pepper chips, and curry sauce on everything became staples that exist nowhere else on Earth. Britain didn't just adapt Chinese food, it created an entirely new cuisine and called it Chinese. Today, there are over 15,000 Chinese restaurants in the UK, and British Chinese food is so embedded in culture that it is considered comfort food by millions. The real Chinese food? Still largely a mystery to most British diners. India has developed one of the most extraordinary relationships with Chinese food anywhere in the world. Indian Chinese cuisine, known as Hakka Chinese, is a completely unique culinary fusion developed by the small Chinese community that settled in Kolkata in the 1800s. Dishes like chili chicken, Manchurian, and Szechuan fried rice have absolutely nothing to do with China. They are Indian dishes with Chinese names, built on Indian spices and flavor profiles. And India loves them passionately. Indian Chinese food is now a multi-billion-dollar industry within India. The irony is profound. India created its own version of Chinese food so successfully that most Indians have never tasted real Chinese cuisine and don't feel the need to. Russia's relationship with Chinese food is uniquely shaped by geopolitics. Russia and China share the world's longest border and a complicated history of alliance, rivalry, and mutual suspicion. Chinese restaurants exist across Russia's major cities, but have never achieved mainstream popularity. Russian food culture is deeply conservative, heavy, meat-forward, rooted in centuries of tradition. The delicate flavors of Cantonese food or the numbing heat of Sichuan cuisine clash fundamentally with Russian palates. And beyond taste, there is a cultural wariness, a historical discomfort with Chinese cultural influence that has never fully disappeared. Chinese food in Russia is tolerated, occasionally enjoyed, but never truly embraced. Chinese food has arrived in West Africa on the back of China's massive infrastructure investment across the continent. Chinese restaurants have opened across Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi, but they serve almost exclusively Chinese workers and business travelers, not local populations. West African food culture is among the most distinct and proudly defended in the world. The bold, complex flavors of jollof rice, egusi soup, and suya have no appetite for the subtle umami of Chinese cooking. There is also a growing political tension. As China's economic presence in Africa increases, so does local resentment. And that resentment has found an unexpected outlet. In several West African countries, anti-Chinese sentiment has directly impacted Chinese restaurant businesses. Locals avoiding them not because of the food, but because of what they represent. Japan's relationship with Chinese food is perhaps the most sophisticated in the world. Japan took Chinese culinary influences centuries ago and transformed them so completely that the results are now considered uniquely Japanese. Ramen, now one of Japan's most iconic dishes, originated from Chinese noodle soup traditions. Gyoza dumplings came directly from Chinese jiaozi. Japan didn't reject Chinese food. It absorbed it, refined it, and made it unrecognizably better by Japanese standards. Today, authentic Chinese restaurants thrive in Japan's Chinatowns, particularly in Yokohama, but the broader Japanese population engages with Chinese food primarily through its Japanese reinventions rather than the original source. The global explosion of Chinese food created a crisis of identity that China is still grappling with today. In 2016, the Chinese government launched an initiative to promote authentic Chinese cuisine globally, funding culinary schools abroad, supporting Chinese chef exchanges, and actively pushing back against the westernized versions of Chinese food that had come to define the cuisine internationally. The initiative was met with polite interest and almost no behavioral change. People liked their sweet and sour chicken. They weren't interested in century eggs. At the same time, a powerful movement of authentic Chinese restaurants began emerging in major global cities, driven not by government initiative, but by a new generation of confident Chinese chefs who refused to compromise their culinary heritage for Western palates. In New York, London, Sydney, and Toronto, these restaurants built cult followings, attracting food lovers willing to experience Chinese food on its own terms for the first time. The battle between authentic and adapted Chinese food is now playing out in real time across the globe. Chinese food's global story is ultimately a story about power. Who gets to define a culture's cuisine and who profits from it? For over a century, Chinese immigrants adapted their food to survive in hostile foreign environments. They stripped out the complexity, sweetened the sauces, and created something palatable to people who would never have accepted the real thing. That adaptation kept communities alive, but it also created a century-long misrepresentation of one of the world's greatest culinary traditions. Today, that is slowly beginning to change. The rise of food media, social platforms, and culinary tourism has introduced millions of people to the real depth of Chinese cuisine for the first time. Sichuan restaurants are developing global followings. Dim sum culture is spreading beyond traditional Chinese communities. Chinese food content on social media generates billions of views annually. But the westernized versions aren't going anywhere either. They are too deeply embedded in too many cultures to disappear. Chop suey will outlive us all. Chinese food is not one thing. It never was. It is a mirror of every country it entered, reflecting back that country's own culture, fears, and appetite more clearly than it ever reflected China itself. And if you think the global journey of Chinese food is fascinating, wait until you hear about the cuisine that was rejected by the entire Western world for decades, then suddenly became the most fashionable food on the planet overnight, for reasons that have nothing to do with taste. That video is right on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.